Excellent. Well, we've got another great week of Count-Based Friday with a special guest joining us from San Francisco in the morning, Adrian Chang from MindTickle. Really appreciate, Adrian, you joining us this morning. We'll give you a proper introduction in a moment, but every week we do a poll, and this particular poll we actually dug out from the archives, mainly because our guest has this background of field marketing and customer marketing. But the question that we were asking was really around where does customer marketing fit in terms of the priorities? Um, are you using it for renewal, expansion, upsell, cross sell? And we got a number of votes here. And the reason I had asked the question at the time, in addition to Adrian joining us, but the reason I had asked it was I know personally I bend toward the acquisition side of marketing. And so customer marketing for me is a bit of a blind spot, even though it's very important for account-based strategies. I just find that naturally I gravitate toward the acquisition side of things. But I don't know, Megan, did you have any reactions to this?
Uh, it made me sad. I hope it changes. And here's the thing. This is basically 95% of people saying either they're not really doing it or they could do better for exactly the reason you said, John, which is most of marketing is tuned towards net new customer acquisition and a little bit of cross and upsell, but primarily it's focused on net new. The flaw in that thinking is that most revenue comes from holding on to the customers you have and expanding them. And if you do a better job of that, you instantly grow faster. And the math doesn't lie. And I think that's where those organizations and people like our wonderful guest Adrian, who figured that out. And Adrian's going to talk to us a little bit about how to understand the delicate balance of love and money in customer relationships. Really, I think, end up outperforming in the market. And again, the numbers don't lie, and that's what you see. And I think that's also part of why product-led growth has become such a thing, but different topic. Anyhow, Adrian, delighted you are here with us today and so excited to hear about the latest part of your journey. I think you and I have probably been connected for about 10 years at this point. It's crazy.
About 10 years. And so
Yeah,
thank you for
absolutely.
having me. Yeah,
Oh,
thank
no,
you
it's
for
our
having me.
pleasure.
And
Tell
so
us about your role and what you're doing at MindTickle now. It's fascinating.
absolutely. And so I was delighted to be reconnected with a few members from the Oracle team. And so I currently work for Chris Lynch, who is our CMO. And when he called me and said, we have a great opportunity to build a dynamic team, I said, I'm 100% on board. And so after I joined to lead customer marketing, there was an opportunity to bring the field piece together. And I looked at that and said, oh my goodness, this is a rarity in B2B and a rarity in what I've seen in my career. Because even just in leading customer marketing, when I think back to Oracle and working with Andrea Ward, who led the Oracle Marketing Cloud Business Unit, she had helped create a lot of mind share around love and money in customer marketing. That the acquisition part is just well known and understood. But you also need to think about the customer experience, their life cycle, and thinking about their stories and how do you tell them at scale. And so I really latched on to that. And so I felt when I was at Eloqua and Oracle, it got me ready to get really immersed in customer stories and what helps customers get value. I went to Informatica to build up that acquisition piece and just understand, how do you build the right buyer's journey? And then, so I think about Oracle and Eloqua getting me ready, Informatica being about aiming and firing. I was always more leaning into the tech and getting into, how do you deliver the perfectly timed message? So I got to play with intent and lead web strategy. And then I eventually would come back into customer marketing and advocacy and lead that team there. And so coming into MindTickle, I at least I earned my acquisition badge because I had been primarily customer focused for most of my career. And so I'm just delighted to have this really rich opportunity to figure out how do we get those great stories of customers that are in battle trying to help their sales teams win. And then also think about how do buyers consume those stories, and then work closely with other members of the marketing organization to Chris to say, based on our intent and who we want to create affinity and mindshare with, how do we do both the go-to-market? How do we do the demand? And then think about when you go from demand to creating that customer, how do you set the customer up for success? So there are days where I do feel like I look at multiple pots boiling over. I'm not going to lie and say that it's easy. But it's created a different opportunity for me to have different conversations across the office of the CMO that I would not have had before in my career.
Yeah, I love the breadth of your role and the fact that you can think holistically about that journey. I think it's really important. And I think it is very much where marketing needs to go. It's go to market, not just sort of activities of marketing, right? And tell me about the skills that you need on your team to accomplish those different things.
Absolutely. So I think it is important for the teams to, just be good project managers and just be willing to figure out, what are the different pieces that we've got to partner with to go and get, our programs, live and activated in front of customers. So you've got to be nimble. We've got to think about workflow. We've got to think about, being great communicators and partners with our field, our customer success organization. I'm an economist, so I take a little bit of the budget management off my teams. I like creativity. And I also think that, I look at my teams as, acting like founders is one of our mantras here at MindTickle. So I want them to almost be boundless, right? And just swing hard and go crazy. And it's hard when there's just some realities and some deadlines and some things that you have to go through. And sometimes there's just real roadblocks and conflict, right? I love the survey that was up there, and I'm not surprised because there's so much institutional knowledge on funnel and ways to measure acquisition. So there's a little bit of pushing and advocating. Yes, the customer is important. Okay, we all think the customer is important, but then coming up with the ways to measure and prove that it's successful. So I think that's key. I do think what is emerging and why you're seeing a lot of different folks come into customer marketing. I think I saw somewhere that it's, among the top 3 fastest growing functions right now in our industry, is you're getting individuals who are, they're analytical, they're engineers, and they're trying to link together how does adoption then tie to success, right? So we're starting to see the analytics part come in, because in order to get to the advocate and the person that who's going to almost advertise for your company, you have to get scientific about what matters in their life cycle and how does driving, really that excellent onboarding experience, or making sure that they don't have like a heartbreak moment. How do all of those things then lead to your growth and success? So the analytics part is actually very, very key, right? And I'm finding that it is more important to understand, it's not just about delivering the great program, but is your return on intent aligned with your go-to-market, right? So when you're thinking about, I've had more experience on the love side than I did on the money side, but on the money side, you kind of have to sit and say, as it relates to our go-to-market and our segments, do I have a single buyer or consensus buyer? Am I also looking at that customer journey and say, delight your hands-on keyboard individual, but then also think about that individual and their visibility within their organization? And so the analytics skill has to give you a sense of, great, the customer's using the product, but if we don't have other relationship strength, are we looking at that as risk, right? So we actually have to ask those questions, and you need to have those questions and go outside of just standard, great, you came to my webinar, but no, is that person a hero within their organization? So we're having those discussions right now, and I'm excited to have both my field team and my customer team kind of come together and say, let's support the amazing customers, figure out which customers have great stories to tell, figure out how we can create events that curate the folks that are in platform and then influence and create affinity outside of that. And we're getting ready to do a roadshow and launch in June and go to 3 different markets in the US and ask our customers to bring their boss to work, right? And so we're really trying to figure out, not just at a philosophical level, how do we align, but then create the same experiences that will get individuals excited and help create that duality of delight your user, but then also think about, who else do we want to engage in a meaningful conversation? And for us, it's definitely the chief revenue officers. It's creating affinity with RevOps and sales operations leaders, and also sales enablement, because the world's going through like a huge change of how you create a digitally native sales force, who is likely the first individual who will represent your brand when you have a conversation. And so it's a very interesting time to be in this space right now. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to help think through some of these like nitty-gritty challenges.
Yeah, that sales enablement piece is really, really critical, as you mentioned, because like you said, the transformation that's happening right now is unprecedented, and it puts a lot of pressure on that sales enablement function to kind of grow. You said a ton there, a lot to unpack, but one other thing that kind of struck me was the mention of the data and the measurement. Like back in your Oracle days, you almost pioneered that in a way, right? Like you pioneered the top end of the funnel and that measurement at the top end of the funnel. And thinking about the analytics side of the function, how are you being measured, or how are you seeing others in your function being measured in terms of effectiveness? And I guess my leading answer to that is I've seen kind of on the retention side, but are there other either metrics or KPIs that you're aiming for there?
Absolutely. So I do have a series of business goals and objectives and key results, right? So I actually do carry, I carry some OKRs that are focused on engagement and growing I have revenue baseline growth. I then also have audience specific goals and objectives, because those are also key for even securing the attention and mind share of that customer, right? So there's this premise of making sure that for our existing customers, they understand our rate of innovation, and that the same product that has the same SKUs that let's say they're on for 2 years, that we've created value in that subscription. And based on the value that we understand that they're getting, we'd love for them to continue to partner and invest in us, right? So there's a net overall objective that I'm held to. There is an expansion objective that I also have as well. And so it naturally forces me to think not just about delivering the love because it's intrinsic, but it's also very much tied to creating that customer for life, right? So I have a series of objectives around that. And so I like that, because if I just had the engagement objective, it wouldn't force me to determine, does attendance, participation in our community programs, do these things materially move the needle? So it gives me an opportunity to say, how do I look at the activities in quarter, and do they impact what the sales team cares about in quarter? So the stories, the videos, the digital experiences, keeping those customers happy and keeping them as strong advocates helps us with our demand motion, whether it's commercial or enterprise. Then I also have to think longer term. Are we looking at the health and dynamics of those customers, and then being able to say, okay, these activities are helping us create customers for life? So yes, it's all layered. And so what that means is we have to have different conversations with our customer teams and say, there's a dynamic of love and money with them as well, and making sure that they're delighting customers, and then also thinking about making them aware that we can also help them with other challenges. So yes, lots to unpack.
Yeah. So Adrian, John and I are both operations sort of people, so you're speaking our language here. I'm interested to know, one of the big debates, and I've seen a lot of this coming from some of my former and colleagues at Forrester, and also some of those serious decisions folks who've moved on to other roles. A lot of discussion right now about, hey, let's move on from the MQL, which, hey, it was our fault in the first place. So I buy that. We do need to move on. The trouble is what you go to. It's kind of like everyone complains about Net Promoter Score, but nobody has a better solution for it, right?
Right.
Same thing. So it makes it harder to move on from things that are no longer serving you when we haven't sort of defined the road ahead. And one of the big problems with the road ahead for getting away from the MQL is the fact that attribution is such a mess,
Yes.
and never really accurate, which is fine because in a way it doesn't need to be. But getting to what you're talking about, how do you build credibility for marketing's contribution to revenue when it is in fact correlation and not direct causation in that multi-touch, digitally native experience? I'd love your take on that.
This is a great question. And so, yes, I know. I feel like I have my fingerprint on the MQL gun. So
we all do. It'll be our guilt forever.
It'll be our guilt. And, I have the pom-poms out for inbound. There's records, you can search for it. So at MindTickle, everyone's been organized around a sales qualified metric. And so we've unified on having a sales qualified metric for both our, for all of our segments, and our customer teams also have a customer qualified metric, which is a new motion for us. So there's at least a measuring stick to understand in our concept of how we look at the business and predictability. So we do look at, how many qualified accounts do we have, which is an individual tied to an account, and then do they fit some baseline criteria? Then how many meetings are we having where we're accelerating those conversations? And out of those meetings and all of the activities that we're doing, whether it's webinars and events and our market development team talks to them, do we have enough that fits that qualified criteria? So our MQA is probably the closest thing to the MQL, where it's just a raw campaign response. And the reason why the SQL for us, at least, is a good predictor of what will then happen in terms of going from that stage to a closed one. And I would say, because we do have a commercial motion and we have an enterprise motion, what our systems tell us when we look at our partnerships with our intent provider and our automation systems is, if it's a single buying cycle, then there isn't that much noise around attribution because someone was sent there to go and do that research. And then we can do the orchestration around it. Enterprise has just been super interesting just because of the tradition of how the companies continue to grow. There are individuals who deeply understand what we do for enablement. But when you think about what we do around helping sales team not only build the skills, but prepare and coach, there is this value for revenue ops and sales ops, which does lend to a multi-pronged approach. So that's where attribution for us really matters, because we have to think, where's the customer in their exploration process? And if you look at the keywords, some are looking for sales performance, and then some are looking for readiness. So that's where the conversation for us gets really, really interesting. And we need a different lens and to look at it a different way, right? So if you look at the single buyer, then there's less noise about the attribution. It's just more about giving that person what they need to then go into their boardroom to help make that decision, right? Most of this is happening off the reservation. If we've created smoke and it's enterprise, right? So someone's on a review site or they're at an event, you then have to look at, well, what's our relationship strength across what that potential buyer committee is, and then pull more data points together. So I think because we've moved away from the MQL and moved it higher, it's forced us to look at more things to get a sense of how predictable that cycle is going to be. And I just credit the team at MindTickle and our RevOps and our operations team for helping us get there. I entered with that infrastructure in place. And so it's great that we get to have the more meatier conversation around what helps a customer make that decision, and then what are the data points, and then look at what do we then go back and tune. So that's very real, and I'm happy to be part of a team that's thinking that way.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think, and I mean, if you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear about the tech stack that you have that's tooling that work. But if, obviously I appreciate that you may not be comfortable sharing brand names, but maybe categories of tech, up to you, whatever. If you don't feel comfortable sharing, that's fine too. I thought I'd ask.
So I'm happy to share. And so we do use Marketo, and then we have our outreach sequences. And then from an intent perspective, we have demand base.
Got it. Thinking back to your career, I mean, you've had a lot of success here coming from the vendor side and now onto the practitioner. Like, you've morphed over time periods. What surprised you on the practitioner side that you had an assumption set going in on the vendor side that now that you're on the practitioner side, you're like, oh wow, that's a big surprise. Like, what have you learned in that process?
What I've learned, so great question, John. So for me, it started back in 2014 when we were thinking about, when I was at Oracle, and we were thinking about, because primarily my career had been so B2B focused, that the entry of B2C orchestration and thinking about how do we delight a customer and the channel, I'd say the channel literacy in B2B has been the most shocking, like, steep trajectory. That before, the CMO used to say, okay, well, for programs team, I want to hear your email plan. And immediately from when I left, Eloquent Oracle to Informatica, the strategists had to do soup to nuts all the orchestration and think about all the channels, all the connectedness, and the data points. So when I thought about the concept of the actionable customer profile, and thinking about things that customers were doing, even with B2B, with media, I never thought it would take off at the rate that it has, and that the literacy would come up, and that the conversations were really now about, well, where are customers coming from, and how is it that we can architect the real journey. So I would say the level of literacy on architecting that journey, and the amount of omni-channel orchestration conversations that are happening, and you can credit, when you look at Adobe Experience Cloud, or you look at Visible, when you look at just even demand base, and how they're even thinking about just looking at the perfectly timed experiences and what happens, right? I remember my serious days and looking at our portfolio path and saying, okay, there are some simulated experiences, and then there's some orchestrated experiences in how you architect it. And I will laugh and say, oh yeah, this is theory. There's no way we're going to have to be charged with this, but we are. And I think that is one of the most understated things about being a customer marketer now, which everyone thinks that the selling stops once you land. And I'm like, no, it actually does not stop. You have to continually think about how are other new individuals coming into the conversation, and what does that mean, right? Because then we get to go inform how should we then go back out to market. So it's very interesting, right? Very, very interesting. But I would say the skills and almost the demands, right, on a customer marketer now have just been more, you can't just be focused on the advocacy. Like, you can't just build a team that's focused on the advocacy and the love and the experience. It is very, very important. But you also have to be at the forefront of how the organization's changing, and how do you bring that message to the customer, and understand, are they a customer who is engaging with your product every day, or are they somebody who also controls your future and your fate?
It's a really important question. I think I'd love to know, what do you see next? You talked about sort of the rate of literacy going up really quickly, the rate of adoption going up really quickly. What are the next couple of trends you expect to see from your peers and colleagues in field and customer?
That's a great question. I think the digital piece, I think there's another revolution that is coming that we've got to figure out. I'm paying attention to those companies who are also thinking about product led and also thinking about how the role of growth, customer marketing, and product, how that evolves into one role. I look at the companies that are pursuing product-led growth, and I think you have to have a customer component, and then you have to also think about your data, your systems, and your infrastructure. And like, we're all ops people, right? So you've got to have your security team also be on that journey with you to help you understand the intent of a user to have a great brand experience. They have to be a marketer, even though they might be a product individual, and then look at the product as the channel.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that is going to be super, super interesting, where the product becomes part of the customer marketing channel, but it's going to be an individual who's going to need those skills. Right. So I think that is something that I'm looking at. Right. Because if we're just at the forefront of defining how does CRM built for sales, how does automation built to drive a coordinated conversation, how do these digital channels work, and then try to get the data points ready to go, do some educational stuff and reach new buyers, then there's going to be an element of like, how do you then just do that orchestration as someone moves from offline, then to online, then into your product, then into your other experiences. There's going to be a whole change on how that works. That would be my prediction. And I do see it being consolidated, and the new growth marketer that's in a product-led company is going to have a lot of these customer skills that we're building right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think I would love to see the convergence of enterprise and product-led growth into something that says, it's not either or, right? It's not either you have a product that, sells itself because it's so easy to use and solves a problem, or you have this complex enterprise sale where, in spite of the product, you're able to get, you're able to win customers, and there's a happy medium there. There's a marriage that can make those things come together, where the enterprise people think about, how do I build a product that everyone wants to use? And the product-led people start thinking strategically about how they're engaging with the bigger picture of that customer's needs. And to your point, that's all of those skills need to come together into sort of that go-to-market organization. And I love hearing you say revenue operations. Yay, that makes me happy. Because that's what it is, right?
That's what it is.
Together. We're all working
That's what it
together.
is. And so I think if I were to talk to different individuals, and so I try to make time to do different community activities, it's just interesting to see where these teams live.
Yeah.
Right. And just interesting to see, oh yeah, well, some teams have growth in product marketing, some have it in demand, some have it as a separate column. And so I'm definitely upping my curiosity with just organizational structures and just saying, well, what's your religion, and how does this appear, and how do you work together, and what are the debates? Where do you line? And then what are the tough conversations? So yeah, it's a fun time right now.
Well, I love the direction you're heading in, and we're very lucky to have you stop by and share some of the next phase of your journey. I invite people to pay attention to what Adrian's doing to get an understanding of what's next. But thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Adrian, really appreciate it. And a learning here, we had a couple people comment actually, and somebody was already asking for the recording via LinkedIn. So they are watching. And I just realized we've got two-way communication that I can actually communicate back. So that's fantastic learning today out of all of this. So Adrian, you've soldiered new ground for us here at Account-Based Fridays. But really appreciate you getting up a little bit on the early side there in the West Coast to join us, and we'll send you the link on this. And next week, Megan, do we have a confirmed? I know we were going back and forth. Or we're still working.
I think we're
week.
working on confirming that one,
Got
so we'll make that a little bit of a Monday surprise for everybody.
Okay,
but
there you go.
we're excited to have our
Excellent.
next guest.
Surprise guest. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you same
Awesome.
time next week at 11 a.m. Eastern.